and then we're going to get back into Ephesians 4. Father, thank you for this beautiful morning. Thank you for the assuredness of you being a sovereign God in control and working all things together for good, including all this crazy stuff going on and coronavirus, all the things that are affecting us, quarantines. Lord, help us to be attuned to your spirit, not easily shaken, but instead showing confidence to those friends who might need some confidence as we continue through turbulent times this year. But we love you and thank you that you've got this. So we get to relax in you. And I thank you for this Shabbat. Bless our reading of your word and let it help us grow into even greater unity of faith and love. And we ask you to bless it to that end, we pray. In Yeshua's name, amen. All right. I really do wish y'all had cameras open. I would read it from my phone if you had cameras open. And then that way, does everybody have Bibles or do you count on me for screens? Lucy, well done. Are you in your car?
No, sorry, I was just making coffee. That's why I didn't have mine on, but hello.
Hello. Do you guys have your own copies of your Bible open when we're doing this, or do you need me to be more? By the way, Nick, do you ever edit out the beginnings and the endings of these kind of things so that if we ever rebroadcast this, we don't have the chit chat, or how's that work?
Oh yeah, I don't start the recording until you start the lesson, but I've already started the recording, so this small talk's gonna be in there. So.
Oh really?
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's all right. Okay, so so how about though, everyone? I really want to encourage you to always have your Bible with you, because it's one thing for me to share a screen, but if I share the screen, I can't see your faces, and I can't know if somebody's raising a hand. So Nick will be my eyes. I do have some screens on this one, so maybe I'll share. Let me share content here. And we already prayed up in case you missed the prayer, but so we're gonna pick up in Ephesians 4, and it was really convicting. I forgot to messianicize some of these. I think I cut and pasted and missed a few words here, but anyway. Anybody have any thoughts from last week? That was really convicting for me. It almost, the whole walk worthy in Ephesians 1, 4:1, that you walk in a manner worthy of the calling. And what I think was so fascinating for me is I take great comfort in the fact that we actually, at Hope of Israel, I think we actually get this right. Like, I'm really grateful for our fellowship. I'm grateful for Young Hope, because this entire first 3 chapters has been about what? Like, if you had to say, what is the primary takeaway? Like, if you had to say, what are the big ahas or primary concerns of Paul when he wrote this for the first 3 chapters, what would you say it is?
About the
By the way, yeah, go ahead. Who was that?
It was me.
Okay, you know what? I can't see. All I'm seeing is my slide. Hold on. I'm going to try to log in twice. This could be an interesting experiment. I'm going to try to log in once with my phone, and I'll keep on the iPad. Let's see if I can do this, because then I can see you guys at the same time. Hold on. Okay, good. I'm muted. All right, should it stop? No, dang it.
Nope, this is not going well.
Yeah, let me leave. Hold on, I'm gonna try this again. I'm gonna try this Oh, I'm gonna turn my volume all the way down. I'll try to do that again. And I'm gonna mute my phone and turn my volume all the way down. How about that? I can see, hold on. This is really great potentially. Lucy left.
Oh, I'm still here. I just switched.
Oh, okay. I feel better now. I was like, if I scared off Lucy. Okay, yeah, this is cool. I have your pictures on the phone now. I'm actually dialed in twice. This is great. Okay, sorry for that. But let's go through this now. So, and so what who was answering that? Was that Alan answering?
Yep.
Okay, so what was it, Alan? If you had to say one big takeaway from Ephesians 1, chapters 1 through 3, that Paul really wanted to set firmly in our minds, what would it be?
That Jews and Gentiles were the same Messiah.
Yes, that's exactly right. And he did a lot of explaining in technical theological terms about why that was true. But that's exactly the point. But he also said what the result and the benefit of that oneness in Messiah is, right? So he really went a long way to making sure we realize that it was, a joint inheritance, fellow partakers in him, and this sort of thing. Now, when he started Ephesians 4, we covered this last week already. He starts with therefore, and he's now rediscussing how, he started Ephesians 3 with he's a prisoner for the sake of you Gentiles, but he's really a prisoner of the Lord's because he has a calling. He has a special calling. And so he's asking us to also walk in a manner worthy. But what's interesting is what is that calling? And so it says, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, showing tolerance for one another in love. We'll come back to this, but he sees us as one family, and a godly family, even though our homes don't always reflect it. I mean, look, we're all growing, so we're not perfect, but the way family was designed to be is that it's a safe haven, right? It's like this place of comfort. Like, we want one hope to be a refuge where you might get bruised up in the world and scraped up at school and sports teams, among friends on the outside, but you need a huddle where you have a sense of total acceptance and tolerance for one another, and love. It's interesting because it's interesting that he uses the word tolerance. Like, that almost sounds like, maybe it's me, but like tolerance sounds like, really? Like, I mean, but he uses that word. I mean, it's one thing to be all humble and gentle, but tolerance almost makes it sound like somebody is doing something wrong and you have to tolerate it. Does that, I mean, it's not as though it's like, because a lot of times the language so far has been so privileged that we get to love each other. Yay. And if you're loving on each other, it's all good. You're on the upside. There's no downside. So there's no need, when you're acting and motivated in love, to, if everybody's loving everybody. But the real question is, can you love when somebody else isn't loving back? When somebody is really acting up, is Young Hope going to be a place where you become the shock absorber as opposed to the shock emitter, and you're going to be the one with the patience to step up, and you're going to show tolerance? Like, if you're like, I mean, it's so easy when you're living in the same house. You have to show tolerance all the time because people are going to chase you. People are going to say the wrong thing, play the music the wrong volume, the TV the wrong show, take the bathroom and lock the door for too long a shower or whatever. Like there's just stuff, right? I mean, just stuff happens. And so you're constantly like, you're really rubbing up against each other. And so it's interesting though, that love covers, because it says tolerance for one another in love. And so I would submit that you can't actually show tolerance without love. In other words, love covers a multitude of sins. So it's as if he's saying, with all humility, like you have to be humble enough to know you've been forgiven. And so because of the humility that you have and the grace that you know you stand on, why would you not share that same grace with others? In other words, are we to be people who hoard grace for ourselves and what's good for me is not good for thee? Or are we going to be people who know the grace that we're given and the forgiveness that we've been forgiven, and so we're quick to forgive others? We know that the funny thing is, God doesn't just tolerate you. This is what's so interesting about this verse to me, because God's love is so perfect, he doesn't actually need to tolerate you. He actually full out loves you. He likes you. So that's what we're really supposed to get at, but it's almost like there's a compromise in the word. Maybe I have to go back and study that word a little more, but it's, the fruit of the Spirit, patience, and the spirit of love covers a multitude of sins, which I think this is talking about. Is the realistic thing about we're sinners. And so it requires a little bit more of a realistic word here, maybe for each other, that sometimes you just have to show with patience and gentleness. You have to be tolerant. Is that easy for you? Or are you like the quick shotgun blast? The minute somebody screws up, it's like, bam, you can call it out. It's like, can we just be a safe place where we're really, really slow to call it out, and we just only call things out in love? Like we speak truth, but we just do it with patience and gentleness and humility in a spirit of love. Like that's convicting. Who does that? It's so much easier to say, oh, come on, Greg, just look, man, I just shoot straight. Look, I don't have time for all that. I just like straight talk. So just say it. Just get it over with. Say it. Like, is that anybody live that way? I mean, wouldn't it be great though that if people said it, but they did so in a way that made you feel edified and loved, so that it felt like they were on your side and they're like wrestling something with you, as opposed to just kind of accusing you? I mean, the accuser, Satan is the accuser. That's actually what his name even implies. He's the accuser of the brethren and the sisters. He's the accuser of the faith. And he's accusing God. And he's accusing you in front of God. And this second sentence is convicting, because we're starting to get into application for the consequences. And I'm relating it to how you live in your home. But this is also true for Young Hope, because the context here is our spiritual family. So we're a spiritual family. Like, how do we want to do this? Like, what can we do better? Like, anyway, we want to make Young Hope a refuge. And you should feel a different sense of acceptance. You should feel loved on in a different way, and not just shamed for your shortcomings. That's what this is talking about. It's like covering for people. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Is it hard? Do you guys find that hard to do? I mean, in the flesh, I think it would be impossible. Some people are just more nice, but I mean, they just have a little bit more of a loving disposition. But I'm kind of a bull in the china shop. So maybe it's just me, but like, this one requires some intentionality for some of us, especially the more direct personality types. All right. Well, I won't get into it. We don't have to talk about it, but I mean, I don't want to have you guys talk about like, yeah, this happened with my sister, brother, whatever, teacher, but just pray over that one and be aware of it. Now it says you got to be diligent. So if you're going to do that, in love, look how verse 3 starts. Being diligent. I've never thought of love as diligent, but it really is. Like if you're not diligent to try to do this, I don't just think the default gear for the human is loving. I mean, is it? Like the default is your flesh, which is self-seeking as opposed to other-centric, right? So in order to shift into a mindset of love, what this shows is there's a correlation between intentionality and discipline to the act of love. Like love has to also be intentional. This is really important. I may have said this already. I think I did in weeks prior. But there's something different about the way male brains and female brains approach this. And it may not sound politically correct to even draw a distinction, but God's wired us all differently for a collective good. Like we need each other as a Hope of Israel family to be whole, not just with giftings, but even the fact that there's males and females reflect the complex unity of God, and Jews and Gentiles and different races. Like these things are good. They delight in the Lord because he's not a digit. He's a multivariegated, complex, unity of a being that we're designed to reflect and be his body. And we're not designed to be all uniform, right? So so let me just be real about this for life. This is more of a life coaching lesson on how to be diligent in love. Guys, and think about this for your future spouses. Guys are supposed to do their best to model Messiah, right? In fact, Ephesians is going to come up with this later on in chapter 5. It's usually a big wedding verse where I say a mystery. I'm not speaking of man and wife, but Messiah and the congregation, and he gets into that. And so the idea, though, is that Messiah takes action. He takes initiative to love us, but sometimes that just means that you do it without feeling it. See, what I want you to understand about this word love is, what is love in the context of the Bible? Not Hallmark movies, but the Bible. Like, what is love? What is love in the Bible? Besides, we know it's God, but is it a feeling? Is love a feeling? I mean, it can result in feelings. I mean, you can have feelings, but it's a result, right? It is love a feeling, or is love? And you should. I mean, I'm not saying anybody should just, hey, it would be very bad if you just said in the context of marriage that I'm just going to decide, right? There's a lot of counseling, so this is not a marriage counseling class. This is a youth Hope of Israel, Young Hope youth discussion. But I do want to make a point about biblical love, whether it's in marriage or in the context of one for each other in the youth group. It's got to be, it's a diligent, like, it's a commitment. It's deciding to do something because it's the right thing to do. In other words, there's times, ladies, when a guy has to just do something without feeling it because he knows he's called to do it, and then the feelings will follow. But it's almost impossible for them to feel first. In other words, if you said, well, if you don't feel like it, don't bother. That's not fair. That's not fair for any of us to ever say to each other. You can't say, well, if you don't feel like it, don't even bother. No. What about just wanting to sacrifice because I know you like something, or I know that this is the right thing to do, so I'm going to be diligent to make an intentional decision to love, and I'm just going to act, and I'm going to do so based on my calling, and then it feels great afterwards. Like, have you ever done that? Have you ever done something and you didn't want to do it, but then the peace and the kind of spiritual sensation of reward, maybe, or those emotional feelings that you wished could have been a primary motivator beforehand, and maybe you've leaned too much on to rely on your feelings as to what to do and how to treat people, but instead you flip from that and you start just doing stuff based on the Bible. If you know these things, blessed are you who do them. And so you just do it. You just do it because it said you were supposed to do it, and you do it with more of a diligence as opposed to emotion. And then it's like, that was awesome. And you walk away from it later going, wow. Does that follow? Does that make sense? Did I go too deep? I sometimes wonder whether I don't want to have gone off the deep end. Maybe I'm just in my own little thing. Does that make sense, or am I too out over the horizon on this one?
It makes sense.
Cool. So I would tell you that love is, in the context of the Bible, putting other people first, but putting them eternally first, like looking out after their eternal well-being and having a great concern for that, and seeing them for who they are in Messiah, honoring them and making a diligent decision to treat them that way. Does that make sense? So we're not talking romantically motivated feelings, even though that same love is what will anchor a marriage long after when you're in old age and you're in a hospital bed. All right. So love, being diligent. So it's a diligence. So it's an intentional act. Now being diligent, but where do you get it from? Well, you have to preserve the unity of the Spirit, being diligent to preserve. So you have preserve. It's another one of those compromised words like tolerance, right? Preserve. In other words, the unity of the Spirit's there. You were brought in with a peace offering. You have the bond of peace, the bond of love. Colossians 3, 14 and 15 really kind of parallel this portion, and it's a great verse to read to kind of see Paul's further reflections on this sentence. But it's in love, in the Spirit, bond of peace, bond of love. You're really, it's got to be Spirit filled. In other words, if it's not the Spirit, it's bad. Someone asked me, and I won't tell you who it was, but I mean, some of you, well, I don't know, probably not. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They would be well known, and not in our congregation, but they would be well known. And he was having some trouble in his marriage. And the question that his wife asked him after things were not seeming to get better, and the kids seem to be siding more with the dad, and that's never good to even have kids having to think in terms of choosing, right? You're already in a bad situation when that stuff starts happening. But kids were starting to side with dad, and he goes, and she asked the husband, do you think it's me? Am I the problem? And the husband doesn't know how to answer because he wants to sort of say yes, right? And then he doesn't want to then get her mad and make her the problem and then make it not how. So yeah, he's asking me, he's like, what do I say to that? I got to get back there on this. And the answer is, everything other than the Spirit is the problem. You, me, everything. In other words, there's no good part of our flesh. As much as we would be desperate to want to claim credit for our flesh and some pride of life that it contains that makes us feel better about ourselves, that gives us some sort of vain sense of validity or value, like, don't look for your value there. Your value is in being a joint heir and child of God, the King of the universe. Why would you trade that for some, instrument to be used by that God, as opposed to, and instead of making it an idol or making it like, this is what makes me, the best me and me, whatever, like this whole thing, right? And so the whole point is you're supposed to preserve the spirit, the unity of the spirit. And so anything that's not the spirit is trying to rob you of the spirit. So if you're going to preserve the spirit, it means you have to cast off things. We're going to get into that in the next. He's going to talk about how to do this in the next chapter. But he's building a case for executing now, right? So the spirit, and then he goes off, and I love this. He's like, there's one body, one spirit, just as you were called in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one immersion, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. Wow. Any pretty severe, right? Like, is there any doubt in his mind that we're called the oneness? Like that if you don't see that, like, but what I love about this verse, I always think of this verse with Hope of Israel. Verse 4 is great for Hope of Israel and one hope. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called in one hope. The hope of Israel is that one hope, because, and we're going to get into that later. Well, let's keep going, because there is no hope other than the Messiah of Israel. And that's what he was talking about in chapter 2. And it's so interesting that, we got to be careful to not be prideful against the rest of the body of Messiah that maybe doesn't even understand the application of this chapter. Because I used to think, this is where Hope of Israel should be partnering more with churches, and we should just, do something together and partner together and build a building together, something like, like let's get a joint gym with this other congregation next door to our parking lot, covenant. No, I mean, you could do that, sure, fine, but Hope of Israel is that expression of that unity. Like, this is what I find so precious about our fellowship. It's a unique thing that we have, that we're actually executing against these words by pursuing the calling and the redemptive plan of God in the one hope that we're called, to the Jew first and also equally the Gentile. But the hope of Israel, the Messiah, is the hope of the world. It's the hope of the whole calling, and we see that. We talked about it in Romans last week, right? We talked about it in Romans, but you're going to see that word fullness come up again. So let's keep going down so we can get through the first little bit of this, because I really want to lock in, spend some time on the last two, on verse 14, 15. Anyway, but to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Messiah's gift. Therefore it says, when he ascended on high, he led captive a host of captives, and he gave gifts to men. Now this expression, he ascended, what does it mean, except that he had also descended into the lower parts of the earth? He who descended is himself also he who ascended far above the heavens, so that he might fill all things. Wow, this is a deep one. Paul just blew everybody's mind with this. He blew mine. When Messiah gave his life on the cross, he literally descended and led forth all the, what we call, you call Old Covenant saints, the bosom of Abraham. There's a lot of different terminologies, but he's our first fruits, right? So he's the first fruits, but he went and proclaimed victory on the cross. And Paul's saying he led forth a host of captives who are basically looking forward to Messiah paying off in the same way we look back on him. He's already paid off. So, but he said something interesting on the cross. It's a deep thought for those that are just like the questioners and the scrutinizers of Scripture. When he passed, right before he passed on the cross physically, he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Because all of the sin of the world was poured out on him, and he was separated from the Father. And then he said something profound. He said, "It is finished," meaning he became the sin offering, he became the peace offering, he became the fulfillment of every old covenant Mosaic offering, every picture, every shadow. He fulfilled it all. Like bam, in one shining moment, he says, "It's finished." But before he did that, he spoke to one of the prisoners who believed in him on the cross that day. And he said, "You will see me this day in paradise." And so the question is, if you're going to see me in paradise this day, but he descended first before he ascended, and he led hosts of captives, what does that say about what paradise is? If both are true, what does it say paradise means? Because we know both are true. Paradise is being in the presence of Messiah. Wherever Messiah is paradise. So when he descended, after it had been finished and the payment had been complete and the punishment complete, he didn't descend to be punished. In other words, there's a lot of bad teaching that's like he descended into hell and got tormented for 3 days. That's not what the Bible teaches. He descended to have a victory parade. So they're down there partying almost like a holding tank in the groomsman's room in the green room. Like that's the green room, right? He goes down into the green room of the basement, says it's finished, and everybody's like, "You did it! Hey, woo!" And he's leading, and it had to be an awesome parade. I wish I could have seen. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if we get to see this. I can't wait. I wish. There's so many mysteries that the Bible doesn't really go into detail about, and I don't want to paint what isn't in the Bible, but this is a pretty profound portion, because he went down there, and wherever he is, like if you remember Messiah, nobody stayed dead around him, right? So he's down there, and the fathers are at peace, bosom of Abraham, whatever you want to call it, and he leads forth the captives. I mean, the holding tank is a jailbreak. They were captive until he did his job. He did his job, and then but he had to descend and become like one of us in order to become the perfect intercessor, right? So he became the perfect intercessor, and so now we get into what these gifts are. So he has to. So he's picturing. I want you to just look at the language. He descended so that when he ascended, he pours out from above. So he's pouring out his spirit. It's like, so that he might fill. So when he's filling all things, he's doing so from on high, having come down, defeated everything. He's now ascended to the right hand of the Father with all authority in heaven and earth given to him. And he pours out his spirit, this spirit of unity, into us with gifts, so that he might fill all things through us. So we become his body. Does that make sense? Do you follow the theology of it all there? It's a deep thought, and so then he's giving gifts. So he's giving gifts. Like some have the gift of this, some have the gift of that, some have the gift of administration, some teaching, some preaching, all these various gifts. And we can take a different study on the gifts sometimes of the Spirit. But he talks about some as apostles, some as prophets, some as evangelists, some as pastors and teachers, all for the equipping of the saints, for the work of service to the building up of the body of Messiah. So all being built up into him. Like your calling is to be conformed into the likeness of Messiah, but it's a corporate likeness. So you don't get to do this in isolation, because look at verse 13. Until we all attain to the unity of the faith and to the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, person. This is the generic person, like the body of Messiah, male or female, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Messiah. That word fullness, that's that same fullness that we talked about last week, that you may be filled up to the fullness of him. Fullness of the Gentiles, fullness of the Jews, fullness of Messiah, one God, all filled up into him. So that's like a crescendo. So you guys are the youth group. You're called to grow up into a mature body, not just individually, but as young hope is called to grow up. You're young, but you have the right hope of calling. You have the most perfect expression of this chapter I could imagine exists, not just in Charlotte, but I don't know that I've ever seen it. It's like, what a precious, awesome opportunity. So therefore, I'm going to hold till next week how we do that in verse 15 and 16. But let's go back and see how we do that. Will you guys commit in your homes, first in your heart, you got to open up to Messiah, you got to be diligent to ask him to fill your heart with his spirit, and then take an action, take initiative, be diligent. Like, will you take an action today on Shabbat that's intentional, that shows sacrificial love and tolerance for someone in your home? Will you do it for each other online? If we weren't together, if we can't be together in person, but will you actually decide this day that you want to try Messiah out, and you want to actually try to know what being a vessel of grace is and walking with intentionality? Will you be bold enough to take the words of God written through Paul for your sake, so that you would grow up and be filled and grow into his fullness? And it's us. It's not a you, it's an us. It's a corporate thing, right? So who can you show tolerance for today? That's what I want to ask you. I hope you're looking for an occasion to show tolerance and gentleness and patience with someone today. I hope you have the opportunity to be humble and say, and be the first person to initiate that you're sorry. To be humble enough to go, because the Bible talks about, hey, do it so much as that you're in control of it. Like, I can't tell you the amount of times it's grieved me, and I had to humble myself and apologize for my 1% when the other person was 99% wrong. And I go off and apologize for the one thing, and I'd have to make up something. Sometimes I think I'm in my pride, I'm like, I didn't do anything wrong, and then eventually I'm like, well, I might have not used the right tone in the conversation. Maybe I didn't even approach the conversation with the right amount of patience. So I can at least say, hey, I just want.
Yeah, Greg, you cut out there. Your alarm went off and you cut out.
So I cut out and my alarm went off. It's 10:15. I kind of got to go in soon here. But so even though I didn't think the substance of anything I did or said was wrong, I was right. I was right about all of it. So what? I wasn't humble about it. I didn't speak with gentleness. I wasn't exactly patient in the conversation. So when did I get off on thinking it's all about, my intellectual correctness or me being right in the situation and then pounding somebody with it? See, that's a bigger problem. I can actually be technically right and even worse wrong. There's weightier issues of the law. Don't get into the checkbox of faith where it's like, I'm going to accuse and think myself superior because I know something, or I I approached this and I know I'm right about it, and so I didn't show gentleness, patience, and love and tolerance. Well, that's the whole point. The whole point is the unity of the Spirit, not the correctness of your theology or thought or situational awareness on this political issue or whatever. It's like, give me a break. Wait, you missed the whole point. So if you know stuff, great, but that puffs you up. So will you be intentional today to take this teaching and find somebody who you can be humble and show patience or tolerance to, and do your best to preserve unity in the house? You might be the person. It might be a parent. You might have to be that for a parent. It happens. We're flawed beings. We're growing. We're kids. We're just bigger versions of kids. We're still growing. We're all called into this one body, one hope, one faith, one set of love. So I'm just gonna challenge you today. I want to know next week. Let's start making this more interactive. It's hard because we're on screens, but I want you to find a chance to be intentional and diligent to preserve a moment of peace and unity, and to willfully choose in spite of your feelings, in spite of your emotions, to depend on the Word of God instead of what you feel, and to take intentional action according to the character of Messiah, and give gentleness, patience, and tolerance to someone. And I can't wait. You don't have to tell us who it is next week if you don't want to, but I want to know you did it. I want to know if this even matters that we're learning it. Because guess what? If we're learning it and we don't do it, oh boy, oh boy. To whom much has been given, much is required. And we're getting fat on the trough of knowledge, but this means nothing to you. This is actually it's condemnation and judgment to you if you don't at least try to pray to the Lord to give you an opportunity and be filled enough with His Spirit to see the opportunity to actually do it. So don't slip back. Don't slip back this week. Let's find an opportunity, and you know you're going to get the opportunity. You know somebody's going to tweak you. You're going to get tweaked probably before the day's out. And somebody's going to hit you with a hammer, and they're going to show no patience and no gentleness, and they might even yell at you. And that's the moment when you get to actually show this love. You get to stay humble and not flex back, and you get to be the shock absorber, not the shock emitter. So let's all try to go for it. Can we? Let's look for the opportunity, because it's coming. I promise you, He tests everything He teaches. He tests. You will be tested on this week. I just can't wait to hear what opportunities, and I don't want you, it's not a prideful satisfaction. It's an awesome opportunity, and it'll help restore and relationships, and it'll build you into the faith. All right, let's pray. Father, these are awesome words from Paul, who was willing to be calm in the midst of being in prison. What a humbling example of talk about a worthy walk. Thank you for giving us Paul and his words of yours through him. Thank you for his faithfulness to the calling, so that he could provoke us, Lord, provoke us to the same manner of maturity. But Lord, I got to tell you, I'm nowhere close, and I don't imagine anyone on this call is close to this, so it can be a little intimidating. I just ask that you would help us to be intentional about pursuing you this week. Would you just help us not just know this stuff, but would you please, Lord, bless us with your presence and a sense of your Spirit, and let us open up and focus on you. Let us focus on you and not ourselves, and let us fill up on your Spirit, but not that it's a feeling, but that we would be diligent about the unity with you, and therefore with each other. So give us your character this week. Actually, just live your character out through us. Help us to set ourselves aside humbly. So let us humble ourselves to be filled up on you, that we might actually show a picture of you and begin to break the cycle. And let us be the ones that get to break it, and to be the ones to jump to tolerance first, and humility and gentleness first, and patience. Give us that chance, Lord, to grow up. Give us that chance to grow up and help us to step up when the moment arises. And when we fail, Lord, help us to not feel guilty, but just to say, yeah, Lord, wow, get it. So you help me better next time. Just would you just make us aware that we can begin to grow into your likeness a little more this week? We're not going to be perfect. We thank you that you don't judge us according to to perfection. All judgment's already been made. We have a guilt offering. There is no guilt in this, Lord, no guilt. So don't let us be hindered by pride or guilt, but let us be humble and assured of your fullness and your in you and your sacrifice for our behalf. And let us just pass on your love and grace at a moment in time today and this week, I pray. In Yeshua's name, amen.